Welcome in, everybody, to the It's Official podcast. I'm Jeremy Plonk from Horse Player Now and with Xpressbet, flying the family truckster solo this week. Partner Jeff Siegel, hopefully back here shortly in due time. Look forward to having him back on the program. You know, we take on 5 hot topics in horse racing each and every week. And this week, when you look at the schedule, it's not the biggest week in racing coming up this Saturday. We do have something old, something new to talk about in Virginia. Last week, though, we had the Horse of the Year back in action. We had Flightline's kid brother, and we had ourselves a rewarding but maybe controversial race at Tampa Bay Downs. Let's get into the 5 topics and start on the big board with our Goosebump Award. This is where Jeff typically picks out the horse or race that got him excited, got him up out of his chair watching the race. Well, for me last week, there was a little extra incentive watching the Tampa Bay Derby. Been a big fan of Owen Almighty since back in his 2-year-old campaign, and this is a horse I have a lot of respect for, more than the buyer speed figures might indicate, and maybe the public as well. But Owen Almighty went to the Tampa Bay Derby, I thought, with a one-track mind. Go to the front, get there, and improve your position under Irad Ortiz. He did just that. Let's go back to Goosebump Award. He was dominant in the end.
Owen Almighty brings him around to the top of the stretch. Brodeur, Patch Adams 3 wide. Filoso on the far outside. Chancer McPatrick still waiting for that seam to arrive as Owen Almighty turns him in. Owen Almighty to the 8th pole, 2 lengths in front of Chancer McPatrick, who tries to come after that one, but Owen Almighty's 3 lengths in front. Chancer McPatrick, a final 16th. Hill Road up the inside. It's Owen Almighty in front. Owen Almighty by 4. Owen, the all-powerful Owen Almighty, wins the Tampa Bay Derby. Chancer McPatrick was second. Third went to Hill Road. Patch Adams 4th.
The come-home time spectacular for Owen Almighty, 23.92 for the 4th quarter of the mile and a 16th. Final 16th of a mile, 5.84. You don't see him shade 6 seconds, especially at this class level. Yes, it was 112-2 for the first 6, so you should finish up strong, but this was exceptionally strong. So Owen Almighty, really good performance. He gets the Goosebump Award in the Tampa Bay Derby. Let's talk about that race now and its Triple Crown implications. As for the Tampa Bay Derby, it was Owen Almighty over the 2 Chad Brown runners in there. Chancer McPatrick, last year's dual Grade 1 winner, winning a couple in New York at the Grade 1 level, and then Breeders' Cup 3rd place finisher Hill Road coming back with a 3rd place finish in his own right. We'll talk about those top 3 and their Triple Crown aspirations here as we look at the Tampa Bay Derby fallout. Owen Almighty's trainer, Brian Lynch, said immediately after the race, he's thinking Pat Day Mile still for this horse. He thought Pat Day Mile going into it. But 48 hours after the race, there was a little bit more discussion of being open-minded towards the Kentucky Derby run. And again, you cite those closing fractions here at a mile and a 16th, 23.92 and 5.84, just absolutely exceptional. That makes you think maybe, just maybe, this horse has more in the tank. He is front-running speed. The Kentucky Derby is a much bigger blender on the front end than what he's going to see, or what he did see in the Tampa Bay Derby. So he's not going to be able to run the same kind of race and win the Kentucky Derby, likely. He's going to have to show a little bit more stamina and, ability to get away with fractions that aren't so easy and still kick on. So maybe a test at a mile and an 1/8 would give you that answer. And Lynch said if they do go to the Kentucky Derby with the Tampa Bay Derby winner, they would not train up to the Derby. He would try to get a mile and an 1/8 race. Obviously, the Bluegrass at Keeneland makes the most sense. Lynch supports that meet pretty strongly that time of year. You're already in Kentucky, and if you're going to go to the Pat Day Mile out of that, then you train up to the Pat Day Mile, he said. So you can kind of go to Kentucky, get to Keeneland, get settled in. And if you want to run him in the Bluegrass, you got an opportunity there to see if he can get the mile and an 1/8 under a little bit more pressure and then take that Kentucky Derby test. If he fails the test in the Bluegrass, you probably end up skipping the Pat Day Mile. And if you're going to cut this horse back and trip in the future, maybe you go to the Woody Stevens or something like that, or recalibrate towards a summer run. But Owen Almighty's had a very good winter. When you look at his 2 races at Tampa Bay Downs, he was a very good second to John Hancock in an underrated, and I mean underrated race, the Sam F. Davis Stakes. Got a terrible buyer speed figure. We talked about it a bunch in my Countdown to the Crown series, how that speed figure may have been underrated by some other races on the card, I think. And Owen Almighty ran second in that race in the Sam F. Davis to John Hancock. And that was the stakes record. That was the fastest Sam F. Davis in history. And he ran a bang-up race, just getting out-finished and running second in that. Well, he came back in the Tampa Bay Derby, Owen Almighty, and he ran the second fastest Tampa Bay Derby in history. So the fastest Sam Davis, the second fastest Tampa Bay Derby, and he's been right there, 3.5 length winner in that dominant performance. So yes, you could say maybe the track's fast, that sort of thing. And Owen Almighty, maybe you want to say you compare him to Skippy Longstocking winning the Challenger Stakes earlier on the card in a faster time, but he ran a track record that day, Skippy Longstocking, and a 3-time winner who just loves the track there at Tampa. Was the track fast? Obviously, but Owen Almighty is fast. Nobody else was within 3.5 lengths of him at the wire of the Tampa Bay Derby. I say you try him. I say go to the Bluegrass, see what you've got there. I think this is a really talented horse. As for the Chad Brown second and third place finishers, Chancer McPatrick, good effort in the return. We were questioning whether or not he's really a two-turn horse. He only had the one two-turn attempt in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile last year, and he kind of split the field there with not much pace help, obviously, but he didn't do a lot of running in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. I thought he ran a representative race on the comeback of a horse who belongs on the trail. He is not off the trail after getting beat just this time. I think he ran better than to expectations, honestly. I thought Hill Road might beat him in this particular spot around 2 turns. He handled Hill Road. He was a good solid 2 3/4 lengths in front of that rival. We'll talk Hill Road in just a second. But if you like Chancer McPatrick, this was a good comeback race. I expect to see him in Lexington at Keeneland in the Bluegrass Stakes next. Bluegrass or Wood are going to be the 2 final preps that Chad Brown's looking at for his 2 horses coming out of this Tampa Bay Derby. It would just make more sense to send Hill Road, I think, to Aqueduct, a little slower going there, a little bit bigger closer perhaps. Chancer McPatrick showed a little more tactical speed. He was much closer to the pace with blinkers on than Hill Road was in this particular spot. And therefore, I think he would do better at Keeneland than, say, Hill Road. So Chancer McPatrick earned his right to go to the Bluegrass Stakes, and he'll probably be one of the favorites in the Bluegrass. You would think he's going to get bet back. He was 2-1 second choice here in the Tampa Bay Derby. As for Hill Road, the third place finisher in here, good effort, first time for Chad Brown, but he was beaten in here 6 1/4 lengths in third. He did gallop out exceptionally strong. So if you look at the gallop out of the Tampa Bay Derby, a lot of people are going to talk about look out for Hill Road moving forward. Could be something to that for start back. I don't mind, leaning on the gallop out when you're looking to extend distances. If a horse gets beat at a mile and a 16th and the race you're going to come back in is a mile and a 16th, don't really care a lot about how they galloped out, but they're going to go a mile and an eighth next, then to the mile and a quarter. I think the gallop out has some significance this time of year at this kind of distance of a race. So that was a good sign from Hill Road. So we'll look forward to that one. He should be one of the favorites too in the Wood Memorial. So that tells you this is a quality race when you're looking at horses that are potential favorites or, top 3 type betting choices in the Bluegrass and the Wood coming up. That tells you it's a quality Tampa Bay Derby. We didn't even talk about the 4th place finisher in here, Patch Adams, yet. He was the beaten favorite. He was actually bet the 9-5 in here. He was expected to show some speed from the outside. He never really got into the race, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But I do think Patch Adams is a horse that you pull the plug on. Brad Cox has got a lot of different contenders for this year's Kentucky Derby. No superstars amongst those Brad Cox trainees, but Patch Adams now around 2 turns has not done much in his couple bids. His 7 furlong win at Churchill was absolutely fantastic last year. I think you try to get back and reenact that. He is a Pat Day mile type horse. 1 turn, Churchill Downs over a track where he ran a hole in the wind last year. We'll keep it with the Tampa Bay Derby as we go to topic 2 this week on It's Official. How about the Ortiz Brothers orchestration? The orchestra was performed on the first turn going into the clubhouse turn, according to either conspiracy theorists or people who look at things pretty objectively. And sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between the two in today's society. But I have to say the ride, suspicious, no doubt. As we handicapped into this race for the Tampa Bay Derby, there was a scenario where the inside-outside speed down on the rail was Irad Ortiz with Owen Almighty. To the far outside in this field of 7 was Florent Giroux aboard Patch Adams, the main threat amongst the early speed horses. Right in between those was the only other horse in the race who really had any early speed, and that was Brodeur in post 4 with Jose Ortiz. Now, a lot of folks who've watched racing on the NYRA circuit for years will swear that the Ortiz brothers help each other out in races, and there's a lot of visual evidence that goes to that. No question about that in my mind. I think that they are friendly and kind to one another, to be kind in the commentary. But to flat out accuse somebody of collusion and corruption and things like that. We need a little bit more evidence than just some visual cues. But let's go to the first turn, take a look at the videos. The horses leave the starting gate at Tampa Bay Downs in the Tampa Bay Derby. You'll see what we're talking about as we go into the turn. There's really no effort whatsoever by Jose Ortiz on Brodeur, the 4, to get in at all. He's staying out, and he's finding Patch Adams, and he's floating Patch Adams wide into the first turn. That allows Owen Almighty to kind of just wrap around the inside, stay away from all of that, cut the corner, and end up with about a 2.5 length advantage as they turn on to the backstretch. So absolutely that helped. Now, as the race progressed, you see with Brodeur and Jose Ortiz, he got engaged against his brother, and he looked to be riding the win on the far turn. But on the first turn, it certainly looked like he might be running a little bit of lead blocking, if you will, in football terms. And, you know, it harkens back to some things that we've seen in the past, and not just necessarily with the Ortiz brothers, but you go back to the 2018 Belmont Stakes, and there was a lot of talk that day about the Bob Baffert trainee restoring hope with Florent Giroux aboard. Giroux was the person egreged here perhaps on Patch Adams, but he was the aggressor back in that 2018 Belmont Stakes when Justify, you might remember, was going for the Triple Crown. It was restoring hope and Giroux that floated a lot of the speed. The horses on the outside of the gate wide to allow the corner to be cut by Justify and kind of give him the run of the race, if you will, for the Bafferts. And kind of interesting back then, the person who was most upset with the move that happened, 2 people were involved. John Velasquez, one of the jockeys on Vino Rosso, and Mike Rapoli, who had ownership stake in Vino Rosso and Noble Indian that race. He was very outspoken about the potential, collusion between the Baffert runners in that particular race to kind of run interference with the long shot for the other runner in there. So, we go back to, well, why do we have this situation? If they are 2 horses trained by the same stable, we used to have them coupled in entries. Now they're very rarely coupled in most jurisdictions in any kind of stakes race for sure, because of field size, and it helps the betting numbers. So it's kind of a dollars and cents thing that we're compromising some integrity for a larger piece of the handle. And in that case, as a gambler, I like it in the case that the field size helps the payoffs, but in terms of the quality and the honesty of the competition, you start to bring some doubts into things. There was the husband-wife team of Trevor McCarthy and his wife, Katie Davis McCarthy, when they were riding together back in 2021 for a short time in New York. They were forced to meet a coupled entry based on some old laws. But after a couple months of losing money in handle, NYRA's, propositioned the state to change the laws. Lawmakers unanimously overturned the ruling that that the couples and people, spouses competing against each other had to be coupled, and that was thrown out. And that's no longer a law. I mean, it only lasted a couple months, but they cited the massive handle loss because of that law. It was thrown out. And again, we make the judgment for handle over the judgment over maybe the integrity of racing, which some of the rules used to be in place for. Certainly the integrity of the Tampa Bay Derby comes into question with what happened on the first turn there. But what are the solutions? There's not a lot of solutions when you think about it. This isn't something we can adjudicate on X. We can't complain it into existence. It's something the stewards would have to act on here. They're going to have to find that there was intent to collude in the race between 2 jockeys. I don't know that you could do that legally from a visual standpoint. They could certainly make a ruling. They could pass a suspension. But I don't know that if that gets challenged in the courts, that that's going to be enough. When you think about all of these medication violations and things that end up going to the courts and then getting thrown out, it is tough to make a ruling stick. And these state organizations and racetracks, they don't have endless funds to defend this stuff in court. So if you're willing to challenge it, a lot of times you end up getting off the hook. And that's, to me, why we do wrist slap suspensions in horse racing, is because they don't want to fight the finances of trying to adjudicate these things in the courts. They're going to be very hard to prove. Absent of a wiretap, and remember, it was a wiretap that took down Jason Service, Jorge Navarro, and the big FBI raid and everything that happened in probably the most well-known suspension that we've seen in horse racing, and people did jail time over. But it was a wiretap that caught him for the medication violations, not necessarily a laboratory that was proven to be legal and upstanding and having no issues at all with the law. It didn't have to pass those kind of scrutiny tests in the legal system. It was a wiretap that ended up taking those guys down. Absent of having two jockeys on a wiretap colluding with each other prior to the race, that I'm going to do this and you're going to do that, be very, very hard, I think, to adjudicate this. So difficult situation. I don't know what the best answer is, but I think you need to handicap for it, and for me in this race, knowing that Owen Almighty was speed in the one hole, knowing that the speed was the 7 in here as well, and that Jose Ortiz was in between them, you just have to handicap for it. And whether it happens or doesn't happen, that's the gamble of handicapping on horse racing, right? But you as a handicapper and as a bettor have to anticipate how the race will be run. Who's going to send? Who's going to take back? Who might float what? Now, I will say this, like John Velasquez is one of the great riders in the game at floating everybody wide on the clubhouse turn. So when John Velasquez has speed in a 2-turn race and he's towards the inside, I always feel that he's going to carry some other outside speed wide. That's not to collude with anybody else and not to say this is the same argument, but it's to say use those same tactics in your handicapping of, okay, well, I think Johnny V is going to float this other horse wide. He's going to have to win from a wider trip, and then Johnny will cut the corner on that clubhouse turn. And as you watch other jockeys' riding styles, you'll see other riders who do the same sort of thing when they have inside speed. They'll break the outside, and they'll start taking everybody out in the clubhouse turn, cut the corner, and then they kind of get a little bit of advantage and slingshot onto the backstretch that way. So use it in your handicapping is about all we can do as a horse player at this point. We can complain to the hills. We can complain on X. I don't know that the stewards care about what's on X, and I don't know that outside of them, I'm not sure who can possibly adjudicate something like this, short of a wiretap situation. So the Ortiz Brothers Orchestra, it's probably going to continue. It's probably a real thing. And until somebody says it's illegal, it's not. And so as handicappers, what we have to do is try to anticipate when we see it might be happening and then try to make our adjustments in how we pick. Let's close that case now and go to our third topic this week on the It's Official podcast. We're going to talk the Triple Crown Tracker now. Tampa Bay Derby in the rearview mirror, but we've got horses coming up this week in the Virginia Derby. We'll take a look at that in just a moment. But after the Tampa Bay Derby, there are 6 horses right now that look like they've got enough qualifying points to be set for this year's Kentucky Derby if they want to go. Right now, leading the point standings is Cole Battle with 70 points. Lonnie Briley said that the 2-time Oaklawn Stakes winner of the Rebel and Smarty Jones, may train up to the Kentucky Derby or may come back for the Arkansas Derby. He'll let the horse tell him. But if he wants to sit, he's already in with the 70 points. Looking at the historical totals, anything 40, 45 and up should get you in the Derby with no problem. Others on that list, Citizen Bull, horse who obviously is training towards the Santa Anita Derby. And we had Citizen Bull in a 6-furlong workout this past weekend. Take a look at that. Thanks to Watch First. 1:12:30, the fractions and the final time, I should say, for that workout at Santa Anita for the big Santa Anita Derby coming up in a couple weeks' time. That's where Citizen Bull, the winner of the Bob Lewis Stakes and last year's Breeders' Cup Juvenile, will take on a field that includes probably Journalism and Beza, 2 horses that look like are non-Bafferts set for this year's Santa Anita Derby. So Citizen Bull in training looked good enough to me at this point. He'll have another work or two towards the Santa Anita Derby, but he's one who's just continuing to hold his form from the 2-year-old season to 3, and he's one of the ones. I mean, you keep trying to find somebody else besides Citizen Bull. I think nobody totally trusts him going the full 1.25 miles, but Baffert keeps putting these 6-furlong works in him, trying to build up that stamina. A little bit of news on Flood Zone with those 50 points. He looks to be headed for Brad Cox out of the Gotham Stakes to the UAE Derby. So he's going from the 1-turn mile to 1 3/16 miles over in the desert, running for some big money. Flood Zone for Brad Cox. Interesting placement there. As for Cox, he's kind of got the hand to play in the Virginia Derby coming up this Saturday. A field of 10 entered the Virginia Derby at Colonial Downs. 9 are likely to start because it looks like Brad Cox is going to take one of his key players out of that race, John Hancock, and send him instead to New Orleans for the Louisiana Derby. I've always contended that I thought John Hancock was the perfect horse for the Bluegrass Stakes. I would send him the 1 1/8 miles next after that sharp win that he had. There'd be a mile and 3/16 if they go to the Louisiana Derby, traveling down there. But certainly one of the ones for the Virginia Derby. Left, though, will be a Brad Cox trainee in Rapture, a very impressive maiden breaker last time out. Rapture's a horse who's kind of progressing the right way, and he's one to watch in the Virginia Derby. Also in that Virginia Derby, Getaway Car, winner of the Sunland Derby, the one to beat in there. He'll be the morning line favorite, and I'm sure the post-time favorite for trainer Bob Baffert. Let's check him out winning the Sunland Derby.
Getaway Car has set the tempo throughout and it leads by 2. Here comes a strong, good-looking move from Caldera. Caldera means business, and he's bearing down on Getaway Car. Caldera looks to have his measure. Caldera with a sweeping move. Getaway Car's going to have to find something more and find it quickly. Touchy is third, straightening away into the long Sunland Park stretch. It is Caldera for D. Wayne Lucas leading a neck, fighting back. Getaway Car will not give up. Getaway Car vigilant on the inside. Getaway Car coming back. Getaway Car, Caldera throw down in an awesome finish.
Also on the Triple Crown tracker this week, keep an eye on this late bloomer, late back to the races for trainer Chad Brown. Winner in Allowance Company last Saturday, Praetor. This horse won by 7.5 lengths in Allowance Company in his first start since September. Good pedigree here by Into Mischief out of Curlin's approval. Of course, she won the Princess Rooney in the Royal Delta. 1 mile win here for Praetor. We could see him maybe in one of the final preps. He might be a horse headed towards a race like the Arkansas Derby. Might not be a bad spot for him to see if he fits on the Triple Crown Trail. Chad Brown's got a good hand to play, though. We know he's got 2-3 finishers from the Tampa Bay Derby that we've already talked about. Maybe add Praetor to the list, a horse to watch out of this week's Triple Crown tracker. Let's add one from the 3-year-olds and talk 4-year-olds in topic 4 this week on It's Official. Here come the 4-year-olds. It was a big weekend last week. We said the horse of the year was back. It was Thorpedo Anna, and she was back to her dominant self in the Azeri Stakes.
Thorpedo Anna, 48-2 for the half, coasting as she goes into the forward turn, a half length in front, free like a girl, still right there. Jody's Pride third, Alpine Princess has come under a hard ride, joined by Recharge as they round the forward turn. Thorpedo Anna still in front of neck, free like a girl, attempting to make a race of it. Thorpedo Anna coming to the top of the lane, a neck in front of free like a girl who's right there. Thorpedo Anna off the turn, free like a girl, still trying in second. Thorpedo Anna, Brian Hernandez Jr. asks her to go, and just look at her go. She hits the furlong pole, accelerates, opens up 3. Thorpedo Anna just gliding over the Oaklawn soil today, and she is back, and she is back in business. Thorpedo Anna wrapped up to win the Azeri, kicking off her 4-year-old season.
Good return race there for Thorpedo Anna. Not the deepest or strongest field that she took on there in the Azeri. It'll get a little stronger and tougher in the Apple Blossom Stakes coming up as her projected next start for trainer Kenny McPeak. Some good races for the summer for sure coming up for her in New York, and hopefully we'll see her back at Del Mar trying to defend her Breeders' Cup Distaff title in the fall. But the 4-year-old Thorpedo Anna, and the reigning horse of the year, is back. Now, will she have competition at Del Mar? Bob Baffert seems to think so. He's got Cavalieri, now 4 for 4 lifetime after her win in the Beholder Mile.
Bella, they turn for home, and Ricci is asked to finish the job. Has a 2-length lead with a furlong left to go. Cavalieri is trying hard to close the gap and is getting to Ricci now. Ricci, Cavalieri. Ricci and Cavalieri head and head. Cavalieri on the outside, and Ricci. Cavalieri gets her, and Cavalieri with an unblemished 4 for 4 record.
He ran down a good Ricci on the stretch out in that race. Hard-fought win. The Bafferts go 1-2 there. Cavalieri is a filly that Bob Baffert said they thought was a superstar from the start. If she's superstar quality, she may get a chance to prove that against Thorpedo Anna a little bit later this year. She doesn't have to leave the West Coast, though, with Del Mar hosting the Breeders' Cup Distaff in the fall. Speaking of West Coast 4-year-olds, another was back, and it was Flightline's kid brother, Eagles Flight, in Allowance Company last Sunday. He doesn't run very often. Neither did Big Brother Flightline. But like his brother, when he runs, they don't beat him.
Eagles Flight cuts the corner and goes on with it. Brazenly on the outside, and Santarena head and head battling for second. And down at the rail comes Mystification, a late bid from Ghazali. But Eagles Flight is in another league. And Eagles Flight strides out beautifully through the stretch. The promising Eagles Flight wins by 4.5.
It'll be very curious to see where Eagles Flight winds up the rest of the campaign and how often we might be able to get to see this one as he steps up in the stakes company. And finally, some news on maybe the biggest 4-year-old of the Colts to talk about. Sierra Leone, last year's champion 3-year-old and Breeders' Cup Classic winner. He has been confirmed to run this next week, not this coming Saturday, but the following Saturday in the New Orleans Classic on the Louisiana Derby undercard at the fairgrounds in New Orleans. So can't wait to see Sierra Leone back in action. And one last talk. We talk all these 4-year-olds, and we love to see them back from 3 to 4 and how they progress. One shout out to a 6-year-old before we close this segment on some of the older horses. Skippy Longstocking, for the 3rd straight year, won the Challenger Stakes on the undercard at the Tampa Bay Derby. Safi Joseph has campaigned him as well as you could possibly do. Skippy Longstocking has always been in spots that were winnable. They don't put him in over his head, and he has had an outstanding career. Just loves it there at Tampa. 3-time winner of the Challenger Stakes. Congrats to Skippy Longstocking. And we wrap things up with our Stars of Tomorrow segment each and every week here on the podcast. Our Star of Tomorrow back at Tampa Bay Downs for the Tampa Bay Derby undercard. It was Accelerized. The 3-year-old won his maiden 7-furlong first-time starter by 7 3/4 lengths. Trainer Todd Pletcher serving a medication suspension right now. So Anthony Scametta, the trainer of record of this $400,000 son of Omaha Beach, 7 furlongs, 121.20. The Damn Motion Emotion, she made more than $500,000 routing, was second in the fantasy Florida League. A very good pedigree for this one. We will see where Accelerized turns up. Certainly stakes caliber off that debut win at Tampa Bay Downs on Saturday. Let's review our topics this week on It's Official. We go back to the big board, the Goosebump Award. Owen Almighty coming home with tremendous splits in the Tampa Bay Derby to get this week's Goosebump Award. We talk about the Ortiz Brothers and the orchestra they conducted on the first turn of the Tampa Bay Derby, the implications of all of that, and what can or can't be done as horse players or as followers of the game. Our Triple Crown tracker talked about some horses that are already in the clubhouse, if you will, with enough qualifying points for the Kentucky Derby. We took a brief look at the field for the Virginia Derby. Citizen Bull's workout as the 2-year-old champ gets set for the Santa Anita Derby. And we talked about a newcomer to watch, a returnee to watch in Prater for Chad Brown. Here come the 4-year-olds. Thorpedo Anna and Cavalieri look good in the Distaff division, winning the Azaria and the Beholder Mile as 4-year-olds. The 4-year-old Eagles Flight won his return to the races Sunday at Santa Anita and Allowance Company. Flightline's little brother looking sharp. And Sierra Leone headed towards the New Orleans Classic. Looking forward to seeing him back in action. And our Star of Tomorrow was Accelerized, Saturday winner at Tampa Bay Downs on the Derby Day undercard. That'll wrap up this edition of the It's Official podcast. Be sure to join us on Friday for First Call when we handicap 8 stakes races for the weekend. I'll be back next Tuesday when we put 5 new topics on the big board. We'll shake them up and review a big weekend that includes the Virginia Derby. First time on dirt, first time in the spring at Colonial Downs. Have a great week, everybody.